Welcome to Flipping the Table. This is our second annual special focus on Gen Z guests and their perspectives on food, agriculture, and the future. Today features the new co-host of Flipping the Table, Coco Sanabria, who is a research associate and program manager with Roots of Change. This is the first of what will be periodic podcasts in which Coco will join Michael to engage our guests. She will bring her unique and thoughtful Gen Z lens to our honest conversations about food, farming, and the future. Enjoy the show.
Hello. So happy you are joining us today. And if you happen to listen to last May's podcast, so that was a year ago, you would have heard my conversation with three members of Gen Z. And one of those persons is now a member of the Roots of Change staff. Her name is Coco Sanabria, and she completed her Stanford University master's degree practicum working for us on our regenerative meat supply chain project back in 2024. And she was so exceptional and liked our mission so much that upon her graduation last May, she came on board. So she is now managing our resilient food system infrastructure project, as well as many other tasks, and is involved in actually every project we're doing. And today she takes on a new role as a co-host of Flipping the Table. So she's invited three new Roots of Change team members to join her. And they too are among the generation known as Gen Z, that is folks in their 20s right now. And this emerging generation of food systems change makers is very important to us, particularly to me, for they are essential to fill the ranks as guys like me, people like me, age out. We got to turn it over. So this generation has great skills, way better than I had when I came out of school, particularly using technology. And they're simply more sophisticated about food and food systems than my generation ever was at their age. So I'm grateful that Coco invited Anna Kathawala, Dahlia Hernandez, and Sanjana Anand to join her in a conversation about their perspectives on the food system, their values as they relate to the food system, and their food experiences at university. So it was a great program we recorded this morning, and I think you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Thanks. Hey, Coco. I am very grateful and excited that you'll be co-hosting, actually just leading our special podcast today with the Roots of Change Summer GenZ Team. And as you know, since Flipping the Table did our first Gen Z podcast last year, and it was actually exactly a year ago, May 2024, it's all because we're really interested in Gen Z, because they're the generation that will be picking up on the work to create a resilient and healthy food system that we hope turns agriculture and food into a solution to so many problems rather than the cause of so many as it is today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Coco Sanabria, our fabulous research associate here at Roots of Change. Please take it away.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone. So I'm joined here today by three fantastic interns and pseudo-interns. We have a person working on their practicum and two other interns that have worked with Roots of Change now for a couple days to a couple months. And so on the podcast today, we have Dahlia Hernandez, who's completing her master's practicum from Stanford with Roots of Change. Sanjana Anand, who's our current intern, who's just completed her second year at Berkeley. And Anna Kathawala, who's also just completed her second year at Berkeley. And she's been working with us for the last couple months. So I just want to kick it off, really learn what brought you into the food system, what sparked your interest in food systems and food, and maybe you could start by telling us a bit about a moment or experience that lit that spark. And tell us a moment too on how you're engaging with the food system now as well. Dahlia, let's start with you.
Okay, hi. Happy to be here. I think for me, I had a lot of small moments that kind of led to an interest in food systems. A lot of it is based on where I'm from. I'm from like coastal Los Angeles, Port of Los Angeles. So we have a very big like fish market. I ended up going to like a marine science magnet high school, which is kind of niche. And I do know, like, I do remember one of the big things that like shocked me was like the amount of like mercury poisoning that is like in fish. And I think there was just like a lot of small like comments and like facts over time. Didn't work on it a whole bunch throughout college, quite honestly. I had more of a focus on community systems and community engagement in my undergrad. But having started my master's in sustainability, um, a lot of the classes that I've gone in have talked about our food systems and a lot of like the waste, a lot of the environmental impacts of it. And I found that like really complex and challenging. So that's kind of led me to like wanting to work with Roots of Change, especially like on the regenerative meat project as a person who eats meat and plans to keep eating meat, for like cultural and like family reasons. I would really or I would really like to find a way to like consume meat in a more sustainable and like environmentally friendly way, especially with like the giant harm that like traditional agricultural meat practices have. Yeah.
Absolutely. Bringing it to from fish to meat. And I really enjoyed that. Absolutely. Sanjana, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure. So, like Delia, I feel like the way I was brought up really influenced like my relationship with food systems. So, I spent my early years in South India, and a lot of my relatives and friends had like family farms, and we also had our own little like vegetable patch, which we would use vegetables and crops grown there in our cooking. And the just like the idea of having like good relationships with the people who actually grew our food, whether it's like chatting with farmers at local farmers markets and like the vegetable cart seller who would come around our neighborhood and things like that were important to me. And discussing like seasonality and nutrition was pretty common. And there were a lot of like seasonal crops like millets and moringa and things like that, which I never found overseas. And I really appreciated like the local aspect of it. Later, when I lived in the United Arab Emirates and the United States, there was like a lot more like supermarkets and like less of that relationship with the producer that I kind of missed. And that's always something that I'm trying to uh, like study more about in university as well. Since my degree is in environmental economics, I look a lot at like the economic justifications for localism, and I'm interested in that. And another moment I would say later on that helped me connect with food systems is when I joined this student consulting group on campus called Feed, which directly deals with Bay Area like food industry companies who want to be more equitable and sustainable. And that really taught me a lot more about what food systems is in practice, not just as an ideal, but as something that companies and nonprofits and people are really working towards. And all of those experiences have given me like an idea of food systems and how I want to pursue it.
Fantastic. Anna, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I had a pretty similar experience to Sanjana. I grew up in New York City, and I have always sort of felt a little bit disconnected, also from where food comes from and where it's grown. But my parents have been very sort of like organic conscious and health conscious my whole life, and I grew up going to farmers markets and sort of being able to having the privilege of being able to shop from sort of the best produce that's brought into New York. And so that sort of sparked my interest initially in food and how it's grown. And then I did a lot of climate organizing in high school, but it wasn't super food centric. I did a lot of more like policy and energy focused work. But then I was gifted the book Project Drawdown for my birthday when I was a junior in high school. And I read the whole book, but I was really interested in the sustainable and regenerative agriculture sections, which really spoke to me just because of their sort of the way Project Drawdown portrays them, not as a silver bullet solution, but just as something that can sort of heal our relationship to the land and to food systems and also to health and the economy and sort of promote rural economic growth and make communities healthy again. And so that was sort of a real change in my mindset about what I wanted to focus on in terms of my interest in climate and sustainability. And so I interned for Kiss the Ground, which is the regenerative focused nonprofit that has produced 2 movies about sustainable agriculture and also does a lot of advocacy with the Farm Bill. And so that was a really formative experience for me. And then I've also done a bunch of research in college about different regenerative agriculture policies in California. And that has continued to further my interest in this field.
Great.
Fantastic. So we've got an urban studies angle, an economic angle, and a policy angle all on the call, which is fantastic and great. I think we're gonna have a really good conversation. So I'm noticing that each of you have mentioned kind of a struggle with combining your own desires and what you're experiencing in the world with food and your relationship with food. And so since you are all students, I kind of want to tie that into your studies as well. So let me ask you, have you come across something in your studies or work that made you stop and think this can't be right as it relates to food and food systems, what you're experiencing? Sanjana, why don't we start with you?
Definitely. So one of the like turning points for me was this book that my research mentor recommended that I read, which is The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. And the book really like opened my eyes to how like complex and contradictory a food system can sometimes. Yes, that book. It's really amazing. I'm still in the process of finishing it, but one of the like this can't be right moments for me early on was when it talks about like industrial agriculture and the fact that the U.S. has created this system which is really dependent on processed corn and like corn syrup, which finds its way into like all kinds of things like animal feed and just like products that have nothing to do with corn at this point. And it makes our food more like processed and unhealthy and full of preservatives. And I found it really interesting that policies that were enacted, actually like subsidies and things like that to support farmers, had also resulted in that. And at the time, I was studying classes on agricultural subsidies and the costs and benefits, so that was kind of interesting to me as well. And that the system was actually like the least healthy options were also the most cheapest and most available. And it made me think more like beyond like personal choice and towards structural change, because it's not just about like students having to make like better food choices, but the system also needs to be like re-geared to be a little better. And later, like when I was working with my research mentor on this research on indigenous food sovereignty, I saw that like the indigenous first approach involved like the tribal government sometimes administering food programs like SNAP and EBIT, and like making those choices that were better for their local communities and promoting localism, to make that system better, so that individuals, the onus isn't on individuals itself to make the better choices, because sometimes there's policies like this. So that was just like one of those, this can't be right, like it needs to be better moments for me.
Can I just add one little thing on this, Sanjana? It reminds me of the fact that the Dene tribe down in Arizona and New Mexico was the first government entity in the United States to impose a junk food tax. And they did it just exactly because of what you were saying, and that raises money for them to actually provide healthier food to the tribal community. So, yeah, really good example. Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. Anna, why don't you tell us if you ever encountered a this can't be right moment with food?
Yeah, for sure. So similar to Sanjana, I also read a book. In high school, I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And that book also had a big impact on my life. And in the book, she talks a lot about the gift economy and sort of like how like taking you should only take half of what the earth produces and leave enough for reproduction and for sustainability and longevity of all crops. And that made a real impact on me because I like, you notice so much extraction going on in the world around you, and that's just not the way our society functions at all and how our food systems function at all. And so that really sort of highlighted to me like what was going wrong, and how we don't need as much overproduction and as much intensification as we have right now in the food system to sustain especially the United States population that suffers from so much food waste and so much excess production. And so yeah, that was sort of like a standout moment to me where I was like, wow, we could really be doing things a lot differently that would make a big impact both on the climate and also on waste and on a bunch of other health issues that come out of our current food system.
Really. It feels like the more in-depth version of the giving tree, really going into it. Dahlia, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I think this is somewhat echoed by some references that Anna and Sajana talked about. For me, within urban studies, we talk a lot about like food deserts. And that was like really shocking for me to learn like fully for the first time. Like I think there's like City of Los Angeles has a lot of very like low income areas. And it's like common knowledge that the resources aren't quite there despite the mixture of wealth that is in Los Angeles County. But like to know that we have these systems for bringing food into the city, and there's still like giant pockets where like communities just don't have the access to food that is like nutritionally dense and healthy at like a cost that they can afford was really disheartening and disappointing. And there is, yeah, I think it's just a wider reflection of the way that we handle like inequality within the United States, and also like a lack of resources in the way that we, yeah, I'm like a bit abstract maybe from the more direct analysis of like the food system, but having like this like very like clear example of like an entire pocket within an area that has the ability to bring food in was like genuinely one of the more shocking things that I learned in my time in urban studies.
Yeah. Bringing that together I mean, it is a system after all these pieces, how they interconnect and everything. It's pretty crazy. So I am kind of curious, based on our conversation, how the three of you on campus, whether you have autonomy over the food that you're eating or whether you rely on dining halls. I know that can really change your relationship with food and the way that you're interacting with it on a day-to-day basis. So I was just hoping we could go around real quick and tell us a little bit about whether you have food autonomy at school or not, or what you'd prefer to be seeing in your dining halls, overall. Dahlia, why don't we go to you?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a strange experience. Most Stanford upperclassmen tend to move out into either um, their own kitchen style living, or they have like private kitchens by living, excuse me, in self-ops or co-ops, which is again like a kind of a, I'm not entirely sure if that translates to other like colleges and universities, but it is kind of like unique to the Stanford campus living experience. I still live in a dorm that like relies on a dining hall, so I don't have access to a private kitchen and don't have like full food autonomy over the choices I make. I do think Stanford tries to have an environmentally conscious approach to food. They have like, I'm not entirely sure what the name is, but they do have food sustainability goals. They do try to provide less meat options and have like meat alternatives. And they have like, there is a bit of an abundance of selection, but I do think being unable to choose puts like a strange relationship on food within the dining halls. Um, Especially if you're like in a dining hall that like the thing that I found strange at times is they do like cultural foods that have like interesting changes, despite the fact that some of these like cultures already have like vegetarian friendly options. I found a lot of squash in food that I would not expect to find squash in for like Mexican food. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so
fair.
yeah, it's a little strange. I don't think there's like a direct. I think Stanford is trying. I think there's ways that they could be doing better, at least within the dining halls.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, so Anna, why don't you briefly tell me about your experience? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I've had a little bit of a different experience. Berkeley has a set of like standard residential dorms for students, and then there's one like off-campus residence hall that I live in, that I've lived in for the past 2 years, and it has its own dining plan separate from the rest of the campus eateries. So I can't speak to the whole campus dining hall experience, but in my experience, it's been a little bit disappointing. I feel like Berkeley is known as being such a big sort of food mecca with like Alice Waters and Michael Pollan, and such a big sort of like food positive and food positive culture. And I found the food to be very much removed from that. I think it's really hard to create a meal that you feel sort of like good eating and like well fueled afterwards. And I'm also an athlete, so I think about that like a lot, and it just doesn't sort of meet those criteria. I'm also vegetarian, and that also hasn't really been a great experience living in the dorms and being vegetarian. But I do think there's an effort made to sort of like educate people about the food and what they're eating, but there's sort of lacking like a seasonal component, or like a where does your food come from? And you still don't really have that like baseline food education. And I feel like people feel very removed from their food. And then even if people choose to eat out, like in the city of Berkeley, there's still, college students, because it's cheap, and college students don't have a lot of money, people gravitate towards like the cheap, more processed food that's in the city of Berkeley, rather than the like amazing opportunities to eat good food that exists elsewhere in Berkeley. Yeah.
What about you, Sanjana?
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with Anna on Berkeley food. I think I had the meal plan all throughout freshman year, and I definitely felt like there wasn't a lot of variation in the dining halls with the kind of food. And if there was like ethnic food and things like that, it wasn't always executed the way you would expect. But ultimately,
Lots of
I do.
squash.
Sorry.
Lots of squash.
Lots of squash, yeah, apparently. I do feel a little optimistic though, because since I've come to Berkeley, I've seen like, for example, at Brown's Cafe, which is an on-campus eatery, I saw that they were actually saying like where which farms the beef that they supplied came from, and I think that's part of like the efforts with the regenerative meat project and the fact that the UC system is one of the like big buy-ins on that project. And also like more like they'd have like plant-based food pop-ups where it was like a dish completely made of like plant-based options, and you could try it and see if you like it. Let us know and we'll try to incorporate it more. So little things like that, which seem like it might be making the dining hall experience better, but largely it's been like something that's kind of stagnant and something that students are like indifferent on in my experience. But at the same time, I went completely off the meal plan when I moved out in my second year, and I found it really hard to maintain to cook for myself. And a lot of students really struggle to find time to do that. So I eventually went back on a partial meal plan where I would cook and also eat at the dining halls. And I think it's important for the dining halls to be there for students who are busy, but I know a lot of students want to find time to cook and make more nutritious meals and more traditional foods and things like that, but they find themselves turning to this.
We hope you're enjoying this conversation of Flipping the Table. Please subscribe to this podcast and write us a brief review and give us a rating. These help us to improve the show and to build our audience. More listeners will help grow the movement to make food and farming solutions to many environmental, health, and social problems we face. It's easy. Please subscribe, review, and rate. Now back to the conversation.
You know, all the campuses hire companies to do the culinary programs, and I think that they're going back to food system economics and sustainable economics. It's really about those companies still trying to make a profit, and what can they purchase and feed that's both healthy and meeting the goals of the campus, but also allowing them to make a profit. It's a challenge. I think California does have some of the best companies that does this work that probably serves both Stanford and Berkeley. But I'm glad also that you mentioned the meat project, because Coco was instrumental in actually working on that project to get the campuses to buy more meat and to build that supply chain. So happy to hear that you're seeing it.
Yeah, we're still working on that, hoping to get more regenerative meat in there. Each of your experiences though really reminds me, and I'm so glad you brought up this issue of cost and Sanjana of time that students have, particularly with navigating their sphere of food. So I'm wondering as you navigate not just the gaps between time and money, but also the gaps between potentially your values that you've listed at the beginning in organic and healthy food and your lifestyle as a student. How do you navigate really that, like meeting that gap and bridging that gap? For example, you may eat fast food, but still care about local ag, or you might want to support workers, but still have to buy cheap groceries because of some of just the circumstances of life. Are those things that you consider? How do you navigate it? And do you think it'll change the way that you interact with food in the future and the way that you're interacting with food now? Anna, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, like I'm from New York City, and I think buying food in Berkeley is even more expensive than it is in New York, which is saying a lot because it's very it's very expensive in New York. And Berkeley is, I think, for the residents who are long term and established there, I think it's a pretty affluent place, as I'm sure it is also in Palo Alto and the Stanford area. And yeah, it's definitely, I notice it as it's a big gap in my friends as well, my friends who have been cooking in their own apartments this year. I think are very limited in their options, sort of in terms of, yeah, creating like a healthy plate for themselves while also being cost conscious. And I think it's definitely something that I think about a lot. And it's not always an easy choice to make, but I think that I sort of think of the activism that I do and the sort of like, yeah, you just working with roots of change, and also like other stuff that I do on campus as sort of my way to offset that and hopefully work towards a more sustainable future where I will be able to buy organic or regeneratively grown produce and groceries for cheaper, that work in a healthy system, and sort of seeing that as an investment in my future, even if it's not something I can attain right now on a college budget with college time frame.
Yeah. Dahlia, why don't you talk to us about your experience?
Yeah, I still largely rely on the dining hall for food, so I can't speak to necessarily like the weekly cost of like groceries, but I do know like the local farmers market is um I am in Palo Alto. It is like the prices that I've seen here compared to like the prices that I see at home are like pretty different. Um but yeah, something that I've kind of or like the question has had me thinking about is the way that from my understanding of how the co-ops and self-ops on campus work is that they submit like a grocery list of what they would like for their private kitchens, and then Stanford handles like the food order. And so to that extent, I wonder like to what like commitment the university has to like having or to purchasing food that like comes from like these like sources where like again where like labor is like paid in a livable way, or like yeah, again, like the regenerative aspect of agriculture. And so much of it is like behind the screen. And like, as long as the groceries show up, I'm not entirely sure how much we think about where it comes from.
Mm.
And I find that to be like a really strange aspect of like Stanford, where like they say one thing, like they do say that they try to like source food from like local farms, but to what extent that is actually true has not always like been very clear to me.
When you go home, do your eating habits align better, or do you have that opportunity to shop for what you want?
I think when I'm home, I go to very different grocery stores. I think the reality of like the campus experience is like the only easy to get to grocery store here is Trader Joe's, which I have mixed feelings on in terms of their like labor busting practices. Um, but uh, but like when I'm home, we tend to go to like a more like locally owned Hispanic grocery store. So I think, and to that extent, a lot of these like grocery stores don't also like have the same level of like quality of food. But I'm not, yeah, it's just like a very different approach to food. And even like finding like the preference to even just like buy a cucumber from like a locally owned Hispanic grocery store compared to like Trader Joe's is like a very different choice, and like crossing town for the sake of going to the store that you know will have like the cultural like needs that you have. I find like very interesting.
Yeah. That's also another consideration, the time of transport and the ability to do that too. So Sanjana, you mentioned that you now cook for yourself and rely on the dining hall, which I think provides an interesting parallel between kind of what you're experiencing for yourself and what you're able to work on, or like cook for yourself. So how do you navigate the gap between your values and your lifestyle?
I think it was almost like out of necessity that I decided to have a partial meal plan just for time concerns. And I like, because on the other side, when I do cook, I definitely feel like the thing of, oh, like on a college budget, it's kind of hard for you to shop at Trader Joe's or Berkeley Bowl, which is like the next nearest supermarket, and it's also like pretty expensive. And a lot of my friends find that to be the case too, like the cost being an issue, and it's hard to change that aspect of it. But I think for time and something like I want to go do going forward when I go off the meal plan more, also is like just like trying to make more time. And this can also be like kind of like through creative workarounds. Like me and my friends, we try to have like these potlucks where we each like cook one thing that
Mm.
we made ourselves, like with ingredients from the supermarket, and we make like a full meal with it, and including like traditional foods and things like that. Or just like making like a like sending a Google invite to like all of our friends to go on a shopping trip to like Monterey Market, which is further away and cheaper, so that it can all be like a social experience. Like I think just making like getting together and having a meal together more of a social experience has made me more motivated to make time for it than as compared to like, oh, I need to eat between lessons or like between activities. So I'm, going to be really fast and I'm just going to get fast food or something like that. So that's kind of like a strategy that I think could be useful for solving the issue of time. Obviously, cost is always going to be a concern, but I also think like here at Berkeley, like everybody is pretty good at like putting their money where their mouth is. Like for example, Urban Ore is like a furniture store nearby, which is pretty popular, but they are like in a dispute with their workers, and in solidarity with workers, a lot of students have like stopped shopping there, and like just because it aligns with their morals. And I think if you look at it like that, you can also think of like buying organic and like buying from local farmers as something where you kind of need to follow your principles wherever possible. And it's something that I want to keep trying to do.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up other examples too. That's students are definitely active in many spheres and in telling people and telling society like what their values are. And that's I think that's incredibly important. So shifting gears slightly, I would like to touch just a bit on your work and what you're expecting to do, depending on whether you're starting with us at Roots of Change or have been with us for a while. What brought you to talk a bit about what brought you to Roots of Change and how you hope what you hope to learn that'll fit within the bigger picture of what you're passionate about generally.
Good question.
Anna, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with Roots of Change for a couple months now since the beginning of this past semester. And it's been a really amazing experience. I've been working most closely with Coco on Roots of Change's RFSI project. So I've been working on drafting a lit review of various county, state, and citywide reports or food landscapes that city, counties, or states have drafted about sort of their food landscape in their region, talking about the infrastructure that they might need to make their food system better, and then also other challenges and financial issues that they're facing. And so I've sort of been synthesizing that information into one literature review that sort of provides the baseline overview and the sort of like motivation for the RFSI project that Roots of Change is working on, and just sort of like a more general landscape analysis of where the country is at in terms of food systems, but with a specific focus on California. That's been sort of what I've been working on so far.
And how do you think
tell everybody what RFSI means?
RFSI is our Regional Food System Infrastructure Grant that we're working on.
Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant.
Thank you. It's been a long day apparently. Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant, and we are developing a map for the state of California on infrastructure. So how do you think your work, Anna, fits within what you're hoping to do next or what you're hoping to do in life?
Yeah, I think it fits in really well. I'm super interested in climate policy with a specific focus on food systems and sustainable agriculture. And I think this has been a really good introduction to sort of a side of the food systems that I haven't really explored yet, and has given me much more appreciation for where support for small and mid-sized farmers is lacking across the country and also in California, and has really shown me that there are so many different ways to tackle this issue. In my previous, like when I worked with Kiss the Ground and in other classes that I've taken and experiences that I've had, I've been focused more on like the larger sort of national like farm bill kind of policies and more nationally focused action and advocacy. And so this has been a really cool experience to see what it looks like on a more regional scale and on an issue that I haven't explored so far. So it's definitely given me lots of ideas about other things that I want to explore and look at before I decide what I want to focus my career on in food systems.
Yeah. So Dolly, I know you are just getting started with us at Roots of Change, but I'd be curious to know what intrigued you and what brought you to reach out, what you're hoping to get out of this experience, and as it matches with what you want to do moving forward in the world.
Yeah, I'm very close to graduating, I think, in comparison to some of the other people on this call. And I think something that I've been trying to figure out is where I would find myself like making the most meaningful change and also like doing the most meaningful work for myself. And part of my interest in Roots of Change is that I hadn't done any kind of food systems work beforehand. And I do think food is like incredibly important to everyone and is again like a very like deep cultural connection. And so in that way, like I was actually like very interested in the regenerative meat project. But in the past, I've had more of a focus on like community level work. I worked with Equality California last summer. So really just trying to find like what kind of work I like find my or like I enjoy doing while also like bringing meaningful change within the system at large. So definitely like a bit more disconnected from what everyone else has said. I think for me, this is one of the very first times that I'm like really learning about the food system, like in a deeper level that's like extends outside of the classroom. But yeah, I think it'll be really meaningful.
Yeah. And Sanjana, what about you? What brought you to Roots of Change? And you mentioned feed earlier that you're involved with some food related work as well. So maybe you can tie that in there too. But really curious about how you think that this experience will take you on to further things.
For sure. So, yeah, I'm just starting out at Roots of Change. And in the past, I guess, in the past like year, I've been learning more about like what food systems actually is, like through studies and also through like this club where I've been working with different like businesses in the food industry and kind of like helping them like highlight those like sustainable or equitable aspects about them that would make that should make them more attractive to like environmentally conscious consumers and like helping them in that business aspect. But something that I haven't gotten as much experience with is kind of like the whole thing of regenerative agriculture and like at the producer level, how difficult it is, but how important it is to like get those producers who are producing regenerative meat and crops and things like that to connected with others and like to the wider market as well. And I think those are like similar skill sets, but it's like a completely different space, like more dealing with producers. And that's definitely something that I want to get more experience in. In my studies, like I'm studying environmental economics and data science, and want to do like I wanted to do research in the environmental space, especially related to, for example, examining an agricultural policy and its impacts or things related to that. And I'm still debating whether the life of an academic is right for me because I've heard that it's very hard to do original research and it's long hours, things like that. But I know that doing research is really important in sustainable business and policy as well. And Roots of Change it kind of exists in both spheres because you talk to legislators and also with producers and try to like create more connections between them. So that's something that really drew me to Roots of Change and something I hope to explore.
So all of you are, and I are part of this younger generation working within food systems. So I would like to take a moment to really tap in on that and ask you, how do you think our generation, I'll say, sees food differently than older generations? And what's something that you wish other generations would ask you about or wish they knew about food and about you? So tell us about that relationship and what you wish you knew. Anna, why don't we start with you?
I think that's a really good question. I think what I've noticed, especially in college, and obviously Berkeley is sort of a very different experience than I'm sure many other colleges because we are in such a sort of, climate conscious and very left-leaning environment. And I think that tends to go along with a lot more knowledge about the food system and also how you can use your personal power and as Sanjana said, put your money where your mouth is. So I think Sanjana and Dahlia and my college experiences have been probably a little bit different than many others, but I think I've noticed that people are really interested in making choices not only that are good for the climate, but that are good for themselves. And I think people just with research and new information that comes out every year, I think people know more and more about the connection between what you put in your body and how you feel and your life and your life quality. And so I think that that knowledge is really powerful, and I think that's impacted a lot of our generation. Just knowing that you have to eat good food and know where it's from and know how well it's produced to feel good when you eat it. And so I think that's really cool, and something that really differentiates our generation from at least the college experiences of generations before us. And I think that in terms of what you said what you wish what older generations would ask us.
Yes.
Okay. I think this is less of a question, but more I wish they would um, sort of realize that these choices are meant for sort of the longevity of not only their lives but of our lives, and that the what they feed their kids now and what they feed their grandkids is also going to have a big impact on the future of our generation, and their kids' generations and their grandkids' generations, and that cycle doesn't sort of stop with them, but continues, and that everyone should be raised to be able to have the knowledge to make those positive food choices, both for themselves and for the environment.
Absolutely. Sanjana, why don't you talk to us next?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that one thing that I really like about our generation, when it comes to food, is that everybody is super like open-minded and interested in not only knowing like where food comes from and what it's made of, if like they're given the opportunity to learn that information, but also like about different cuisines and embracing like international cuisines. And as an international student, I'm always surprised by how many people like know or like certain dishes from my culture that like I didn't think that they would know about, or even like the amount of like restaurants in the area that are like of different cultures, and like the kind of like the multicultural cuisine that is so like prevalent at university. And I think that something that I would like to see between older and younger generations is like more of like a back and forth, and of like older generations teaching younger generations about like traditional recipes and like cooking together, and kind of keeping like certain traditions alive related to food, but also younger generations kind of like introducing their parents to like a new dish that is like popular that they didn't know about from another culture, and kind of like that back and forth of like tradition and embracing international foods is like really important. And I think really like it broadens your life, like also like intellectually, but also it helps you like know more about food and food systems, and ensures that you make better choices. Yeah.
Dahlia, how about you?
Yeah, something I think I really appreciate is I think our generation takes a lot more of a science-based approach to food. Yeah, I think we grew up in a time where we had a better understanding of like climate change and like the reality of climate change and like its impacts. And I think that's less of a potentially like polarized issue for a lot of our generation. Like it's just the reality of the way the planet is right now. Versus I think for older generations, I think they have a very complicated approach to food where they were raised with a lot of fad diets for one. Like I can think of a lot of ways where like they have really negative connections to food, or like the idea of food as an industry is all about like maximizing profits and less about like the impact it has on land. Yeah, so I think we just have a fundamentally different approach to food and its connection to the climate, and what that means for like the choices that we make. And so like in that way, I guess something that I wish we would talk about more is just the reality of like again like the climate impacts and what that means and why that doesn't necessarily have to be such a polarizing issue, and like the way that like we've made climate change this like thing that is somehow debatable based on like what party you're in, which I find deeply odd and like fundamentally like damaging as an idea. Um yeah, so like yeah, having conversations that are more open about food and the reality of like what that means. I it's something that we all have to consume, and I think having a better understanding of where we fit in that system like would change a lot within, especially within the United States.
So we're getting to the end of time here, sadly. This has been quite interesting. Coco, you have one more question? I have one thought, but go ahead.
I just wanted to end with a punch, maybe a quick tagline. If you had something that you wanted to share with people on the podcast about food, something you want them to remember, what would it be? Short sentence. Maybe we'll start with Anna and we'll go around.
I think it would just be that even though it can feel hard to feel like your personal choices are making an impact, it's even harder when you feel that way because people's choices do altogether in terms of what they consume make an impact on the food system. And so just remember that like any choice you can make to make a healthy decision for yourself and for the environment is a good one.
Sanjana?
I think I would say that like the best thing that you can do is to just like care about something related to the food systems. Just pick an issue like industrial farming or like animal welfare, of anything related, and just think about what that means to you and like your life, and try to incorporate like one thing every week that kind of helps ameliorate that issue in your own way. And I think it'll go a long way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think taking a healthier approach to food and like your relationship to the food system doesn't mean you have to change like the entire way that you live. You can start small. You can focus on like one aspect of the food that you eat and try to like consume that in a more sustainable way. And over time, I think that will make you like both care more about the issue and also just approach food in a like healthier long-term style.
Great. Well, thank you, Coco, for leading us through that interesting conversation. I always, as you guys were all talking, I was thinking about when I was in college back, wow, a long time ago. In the early, let's see, I went to UCLA in 1979. It was completely different. I mean, we did not have the sophistication at all of food systems that you have. I mean, I cooked often and what did I usually cook? Pasta. It was like very simple with sauce in a jar, and a green salad. I did do green salads. We did keep bees, but it was a very different. We did not have the conversation. We didn't even say this phrase food system. Didn't exist. So a lot has changed. I notice that young people today actually have preferences around different cuisines. They know quality food, usually, even if they can't afford it. And I see so many people like you coming into the food system, and I'm really grateful. And I'm really looking forward to working with all three of you this summer. We have a big summer, a lot of interesting things happening. And in September, we're going to be working on the big Terra Madre event in Sacramento. I know you'll all have a role in that. And I think that'll be really interesting because it's Terra Madre of the Americas. Dahlia, there'll be people from Chile and Argentina and other parts of Latin America that'll be attending, and also Europe. So it should be really interesting. So Coco, thanks very much for bringing this crew together. And I appreciate you all, and I'll see you soon.
We hope you enjoyed the show. Please share it with your friends and listen to our next monthly episode of Flipping the Table, hosted by Roots of Change, a program of the Public Health Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building a healthier world.